The European Commission says everyone should have a survival kit because Europe could soon be at war or facing another kind of emergency like a major cyber attack. The French government has announced plans to distribute a survival manual to every household. Even more alarming, the French Ministry of Health has asked hospitals to prepare for a possible engagement majeur or military intervention by March next year. France is not alone. German authorities are identifying bomb shelters where people could take refuge in the event of an attack. Meanwhile, Belgian medical universities are set to include training for treating war victims in their curricula. How seriously should we take all this?
When it comes to war, it is not just the military dimension, civilian dimension is as important, because during moments of emergency, crisis of war, civilians play a vital role in ensuring the continuity of essential services such as energy, transport, water, infrastructure. So it's absolutely key that citizens are informed of their duties, their rights. So there is a lot of best practices to be learned from the Nordics in particular, Estonia as well, when it comes to preparedness, what we should have at homes, why 72 hours, the first 72 hours are absolutely crucial when it's not yet clear where the threat is coming from, what is at stake, what is its scope. So we should absolutely be taking it seriously, but calmly.
Proposing a survival kit may cause panic among the population, and it may also be ineffective if the population has not been educated. Take the case of Spain during the floods that took place a year ago in Valencia. Some of the victims lost their lives because they lacked training. They went down to garages to save their cars, unaware of the danger. Many European governments have increased their defence budgets to historic levels. Some, such as Germany, are talking about the reintroduction of conscription or military service. Is this a knee-jerk reaction? These changes might scare a generation that has never known war. Is it even possible to implement such drastic changes so quickly?
I would say it's pretty clear that in historical terms, the status of the military profession is relatively diminished in the West now compared to the past. There is relatively low appetite on the part of the most accomplished young people in society to enter into military careers. This is a thing which is an aspect of Western society which has developed over many years. It's not of an immediate nature, but it's probably been accelerated or aggravated in recent times. So it's not a particularly financially rewarding career path for most accomplished people, and other inducements, notably the reputational gravity of military service is likewise very diminished in the West. So we don't possess an upper class, for example, that still assumes that ultimately the profession of every gentleman is war. We don't have that idea anymore. Probably haven't had so at least since the end of the Second World War.
Countries that do not share a border with Ukraine belittle talk of war.
People are still, kind of denying that there is even war in Ukraine.
And what about military service? Only 10 out of the 27 EU member states still maintain mandatory military service.
When it comes to skills and personnel, it's absolutely true that this has been overlooked in Europe more broadly. Finland and Poland are perhaps now the most ready countries in terms of numbers and readiness, let's say reservists. But at the same time, the European Union should be planning to invest more in skills, in making military careers more attractive. But this also requires a conversation with the citizens about what are the stakes that we're facing, what are the risks, and this is not happening except in the frontline countries.
In countries such as Spain, Portugal and Italy, which have not experienced armed conflict near their borders for many years, much of the population considers war to be a distant, improbable prospect. The invasion of Ukraine, despite thousands or even hundreds of thousands of casualties, has not sparked widespread awareness. The question is, from civil defense campaigns to school programs, from media narratives to political discourse, Europe must now ask not just how to prepare for war, but how can governments persuade their population that preparation is actually necessary?
The problem then for the West from this perspective is that after 1945, for obvious reasons, it has deconstructed national identity in pursuit of a project of deracination, and instead of possessing strong sovereign identities that are perceived by normal individuals as them belonging to an entity that has a strong sense of a large collective we, there is instead a supranational sovereignty sharing and a very much weakened sense, or an artificial sense, of this collective we. So that's the basic dilemma for today's post-national elites, who wish, it would seem, to be able to use the old levers of power, such as national service, conscription, in other words, when that lever is no longer connected to anything of substance socially. Thirdly, that brings us to the point of morale, which is always the decisive factor in war. It is effectively the key underlying issue here, the moral quantity. People are going to ask why they should fight for any of this, right? Would you die for the status quo? This is a question that supposed national leaders will be asking their young people to answer. Would you fight for an elite that a large fraction of today's young people hates them and actively makes their lives worse? So are enough people compelled by love of the EU's yellow-spangled banner in the way that they once were compelled by the tricolor or the Union flag in Britain? I would suggest, based on credible evidence done by reputable polling firms over many years now, that the answer to that is no, certainly not in large numbers.
It would be hard to reintroduce conscription unless you have deep, open conversations with society, unless you make it very attractive financially, but also morally, why it is important in order to ignite this, patriotism, responsibility, and also explaining why this is actually needed, what is at threat, what is at stake. I think in frontline countries, so to say, on EU's NATO's eastern flank, where conscription exists, it should be made mandatory. And voluntary forces should also be explored. But this will take time, and it's not as immediate.
Today, when information surrounds us, shapes us, and often misleads us, we ask, how will government messaging affect perception, behavior, and ultimately a population's preparedness in the face of a real threat?
Sometimes I have that impression, that they do not report everything to us, and sometimes we do not get all the information. But it's also okay not to get, not to give everything, because you also give information to your enemy, so you should not, like normal civil population has to be defended, by the government, by the army, by the institutions, and we do not necessarily need that information, but we need to feel that we are protected.
Is the Russia-Ukraine war the roadmap for what awaits the rest of Europe? Moscow has deployed hybrid tactics in which information has played a central role, and where the spread of fake news and disinformation has become a key element. Will Europe employ similar tactics? Is it already happening? With its battery of online warriors, is Russia winning the information war?
I believe the answer to that question is yes, that Europe is losing the information war. If we take the 2 points specifically in order, Russian public support for the war in Ukraine is strong, and the Putin government is quite secure by the standards of Russian politics. The Russian public seems to have accepted that the war is a proxy conflict between it and the West, in which they are the underdog, which is an advantageous position to be in from a propaganda perspective, which is because it is to say that essentially in colloquial terms that they are in the right. Moreover, And really importantly, the Russian public is largely now convinced that they are winning the war. By contrast, the West is increasingly highly divided, with large fractions of the population essentially accepting the Russian argument that the root cause of the conflict was NATO expansion, historically grave strategic blunder. The Western alliance is openly split. It was already splitting well before the war, primarily on account of pressures arising from the global war on terror and the specific expeditionary campaigns that involved, notably that in Afghanistan. But the cracks in the alliance were papered over by the Biden administration, not very convincingly, but diplomatically papered over. But now the Trump administration has openly stated in so many words that transatlanticism is finished, or the old model of transatlanticism is finished. Meanwhile, the inevitability of defeat in the Ukraine war is, I think, increasingly perfectly obvious. It's certainly obvious to military professionals, and I think it's publicly pretty largely accepted also. Now is simply how much time is left and what will be the scale of reputational damage and economic cost for the West, not to mention for Ukraine.
This is my personal opinion that it's not enough propaganda on European side. You said that there is a propaganda on Russian side and on the European side. So I think that there are not strong enough messages on European side. You are very soft. You have not changed your messages since the war started. Sometimes you are just, in this news, for example, you are stating the facts. Yeah, I understand that the news still have to be objective, but you have to also have your opinion. Yeah, and this opinion, people, they do not always have opinions, and of course they have to receive information from many sources, but you also have to have your own, as Europe, your own messages, your kind of propaganda, in good sense, not in bad sense, but your propaganda has to be based on your values and also on the message that citizens of Europe are protected in this and that way.
How could Europe counter with its own propaganda? And do you feel prepared if a war were to break out in Europe tomorrow?